The snow fell quietly on the small village as Maria sat by her window, staring at the empty chair where her brother used to sit every morning. 3 weeks had passed since Dmitri left to join the fighters. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of silence. Of worry eating at her heart like a hungry wolf. Maria was just 24, a university student who loved books more than battles. She had dreams of becoming a teacher, of helping children learn to read and write. But dreams felt meaningless. Now, the only thing that mattered was the terrible news that had arrived. Yesterday, her brother was missing. The messenger had been kind but clear. Dmitri's unit had walked into a trap. Most of the men were captured, or worse. Only 2 soldiers made it back, and they couldn't tell her what happened to her little brother. He was just gone, like smoke in the wind. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She walked through their small house, touching things that belonged to Dmitri, his jacket hanging by the door, his favorite coffee cup still sitting on the kitchen table, his military papers tucked safely in a drawer. She picked up those papers and stared at them for a long time. An idea began to form in her mind. A crazy, dangerous idea. The next morning, Maria stood in front of her bedroom mirror with scissors in her hand. Her long brown hair had always been her pride. Dmitri used to joke that she looked like their mother when she let it down. But now, as she looked at her reflection, she saw something else. She saw a way to find her brother. The first cut was the hardest. Long strands of hair fell to the floor like autumn leaves. With each snip, Maria felt herself changing. When she was done, the girl in the mirror looked different, younger, more like a boy who hadn't grown up yet. She found some of Dmitri's old clothes in his room. They were too big, but she rolled up the sleeves and legs. She practiced walking like him, talking like him, even copying the way he laughed. Dmitri had always been gentle and kind, but he could be tough when he needed to be. The hardest part was binding her chest. She used strips of cloth, wrapping them tight until she could barely breathe. It hurt, but she told herself it was nothing compared to what Dmitri might be going through. Maria studied his military papers carefully. She memorized every detail about his training, his unit, his commander's name. She practiced writing his signature until it looked natural. She even practiced responding to his name until it felt normal. 2 days later, she walked into the military camp outside town. Her heart was beating so fast she thought everyone could hear it, but she kept her head high and her voice steady. Captain Petrov was a serious man with gray eyes and scars on his hands. He looked at Dmitri's papers and then at Maria. She held her breath, waiting for him to see through her disguise. "You're small for a soldier," he said. "I'm stronger than I look, sir," Maria replied, deepening her voice slightly. The captain nodded. "We need every man we can get. Report to Sergeant Alexei for training. Don't make me regret this decision." Maria wanted to smile with relief, but she kept her face serious. "You won't regret it, sir." That first day was the longest of her life. She had to learn how to march with the other men, how to hold a rifle properly, how to take orders without questioning them. Her body ached by evening, and she was covered in mud and sweat. But she had done it. She was inside. The other soldiers accepted her as Dmitri without much question. They called her Kid because she looked so young, and they helped her when she struggled with the heavy equipment. One soldier, Pavel, even shared his extra food with her. "Don't worry, kid," Pavel said as they sat around the fire that night. "We all started somewhere. You'll get stronger." Maria nodded, grateful for his kindness, but guilty about the lie she was living. At night, when the others were sleeping, she would lie on her narrow bed and think about her real mission. She wasn't here to become a soldier. She was here to find information about the missing men from Dmitri's original unit. She was here to learn what really happened during that terrible battle. She started asking careful questions. Where do they take prisoners? Are there places where missing soldiers might be held? She had to be smart about it, asking in ways that seemed natural for a new recruit to wonder about such things. Sergeant Alexei became her teacher. He was older than the others, maybe 40, with kind eyes and patient hands. He showed her how to clean her weapon, how to read maps, how to stay quiet during night patrols. "You remind me of my own boy," he told her one evening. "He's about your age, smart like you, always asking questions." Maria felt a stab of guilt. She was lying to this good man who was trying to help her, but she pushed the feeling away. Finding Dmitri was more important than her comfort with the truth. Days turned into weeks. Maria's body grew stronger, her aim improved, and her disguise became second nature. She learned to eat quickly, to sleep lightly, to follow orders without thinking. She was becoming the soldier everyone thought she was, but at night, she never forgot why she was really there. Somewhere out there her brother needed her, and she would do whatever it took to bring him home, even if it meant losing herself in the process. The mask she wore wasn't just the cloth that covered her face. During training, it was the entire identity she had created. And with each passing day, it felt more real and more dangerous, because the longer she stayed, the harder it became to remember who she really was underneath it all. 3 months had passed since Maria first walked into the military camp. The scared girl who had cut her hair in front of the mirror was gone. In her place stood someone who could march 20 miles without complaining, who could hit a target from 100 yards away, and who never flinched when the other soldiers told their rough jokes around the campfire. Everyone called her Little Wolf now, and Maria had to admit she liked the nickname. It started during the terrible winter when the snow was so deep they could barely see their own feet. The unit had been sent on a patrol to check the mountain roads when a sudden storm hit them like a wall of ice and wind. 3 soldiers had fallen into a hidden ditch, and the freezing water was pulling them down fast. Without thinking, Maria had thrown herself into the icy stream, fighting against the current to reach them. One by one, she dragged Pavel, Victor, and young Nikolai to safety. Her fingers so numb she couldn't feel the rope she was pulling. When they finally made it back to camp, Captain Petrov looked at her with something like respect. "That was good work, soldier. You saved 3 lives today." The men started calling her Little Wolf after that. They said she was small but fierce, quiet but brave. Maria wore the name like armor, letting it make her stronger when the doubts crept in during the long nights. But the success came with a price. Sometimes, when she caught her reflection in a puddle or a window, she didn't recognize the person staring back. Her face had gotten thinner and harder. Her hands were rough with calluses. Her voice had naturally deepened from months of speaking. Like a man, most troubling of all, she sometimes forgot about Dmitri for hours at a time. She would get caught up in the daily routine of being a soldier, in the jokes and friendship and even the danger, and her brother's face would fade from her mind like morning mist. This scared her more than any battle could. Sergeant Alexei had become like a father to her. He taught her things that went beyond military training: how to read the weather by watching the birds, how to find clean water in the wilderness, how to stay calm when everything around you was falling apart. "You're different from the other recruits," he told her one evening as they cleaned their weapons together. "Most young men, they want to prove how tough they are. But you just do what needs to be done." Maria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. If only he knew the truth about why she was really there. "My son back home, he's gentle like you," Alexei continued. "Before the fighting started, he wanted to be a teacher. Sometimes I wonder if he'll still want that when all this is over." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She had wanted to be a teacher too, before her world turned upside down. What would she want when this was all over? Would she even remember who she used to be? The confusion got worse when Katya arrived at the camp. Katya was a medic, maybe 26 years old, with bright eyes and steady hands. She had volunteered to help treat the wounded soldiers, and she set up her medical station in a tent near the main camp. Maria tried to avoid her at first, but it was impossible. In a place full of rough men and hard voices, Katya was like a gentle breeze. She was also beautiful, and that created a problem Maria hadn't expected. The other soldiers talked about Katya constantly. They made jokes about trying to impress her, about who she might like, about what they would say if they got the chance to talk to her alone. Maria listened to all this and felt something strange and uncomfortable twisting in her stomach. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was something more confusing than that. When Maria finally hurt her shoulder during training and had to visit Katya's medical tent, she couldn't look the woman in the eyes. Katya's touch was gentle as she examined the injury, and Maria felt her face grow hot. "You're very quiet," Katya said with a smile. "Most soldiers can't stop talking when they come to see me." "I don't have much to say," Maria replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think you have plenty to say. You just choose your words carefully." Katya finished wrapping the bandage around Maria's shoulder. "There, you should heal nicely, but try to be more careful during training." After that, Maria found excuses to walk past the medical tent. She told herself she was just being friendly, but she knew it was more than that. Katya made her remember what it felt like to be gentle, to be soft, to be the girl she used to be, but she couldn't be that girl. Not now, not when Dmitri was still out there somewhere, waiting for her to find him. The worst part was that she was starting to forget what her brother looked like. She would try to picture his face during the quiet moments, but the image kept getting fuzzy around the edges. She remembered his laugh, his kind eyes, the way he always shared his food with stray cats. But his actual face was becoming like a photograph left too long in the sun. This terrified her. If she forgot Dmitri, what was the point of all this sacrifice? What was the point of becoming someone she didn't recognize? One night, she snuck away from camp and climbed to a high hill where she could see the stars clearly. She pulled out a small piece of paper from her pocket, one of the few things she had kept from her old life. It was a picture of her and Dmitri. From last summer, before everything changed. Looking at the photo, she forced herself to remember everything. The way Dmitri hummed while he cooked breakfast, how he always forgot to close the front door properly, the way he worried about her when she stayed up too late studying, his dream of opening a small shop where he could fix broken things for people in the village. "I haven't forgotten," she whispered to the stars. "I promise I haven't forgotten you." But even as she said the words, she wondered if she was trying to convince the stars or herself. The next morning, she woke up as Little Wolf again, ready to march and train and pretend to be someone she wasn't. But now she carried the weight of a new fear that the mask she wore was becoming more real than the face underneath it, and she didn't know how to stop it from happening. 8 months had passed since Maria first put on her brother's uniform, 8 months of living as someone else, and she was starting to wonder if she would ever find her way back to who she really was. The girl who loved books and dreamed of teaching children felt like a story she had heard long ago, almost like it had happened to someone else, but everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in March. Captain Petrov called the unit together before dawn. His face was more serious than usual, which meant something important was happening. "We have intelligence about a prisoner exchange," he announced. "Tomorrow there will be a transfer of captured soldiers about 50 kilometers north of here. Our job is to watch from a distance and report what we see." Maria's heart started beating faster. Prisoner exchange. That meant captured soldiers. Maybe, just maybe, Dmitri would be there, that the journey took them through rough mountain paths that tested even the strongest soldiers. Maria kept up without complaining, but her mind was racing. What if her brother was really there? What if she could see him, talk to him, even rescue him? They reached the observation point just as the sun was setting. Captain Petrov set up his telescope on a ridge that overlooked a small valley. Down below, Maria could see vehicles gathering and people moving around like tiny ants. "Remember," the captain said quietly, "we are here to watch only. No one moves without my direct order. This is not a rescue mission." But Maria barely heard him. She was straining her eyes, trying to see the faces of the prisoners being moved from the trucks. Even from this distance, she thought she could make out familiar shapes, familiar ways of walking. Then she saw him, a man with dark hair, about the right height, moving with a slight limp that looked exactly like the way Dmitri walked when he was tired. The man was wearing prison clothes and his hands were tied. But something about the way he held his shoulders made Maria's breath catch in her throat. Without thinking, without remembering where she was or who was watching, Maria started to move toward the valley. "Where are you going?" Pavel hissed, grabbing her arm. "That's him," Maria whispered, her voice shaking. "That's my brother." Pavel looked confused. "Your brother? What are you talking about?" But Maria was already pulling away, sliding down the rocky slope toward the prisoner exchange. Her heart was pounding so loud she couldn't hear anything else. 8 months of searching, 8 months of living a lie, and finally she had found him. She made it halfway down the hill before strong hands grabbed her from behind. "Are you completely crazy?" Sergeant Alexei's voice was angry and worried at the same time. "Get back up here right now." "You don't understand," Maria said, struggling against his grip. "My brother is down there. I have to help him." "Your brother?" Alexia looked at her like she had lost her mind. "What brother?" "Your records don't mention any brother." Maria realized her mistake too late. In her excitement and panic, she had forgotten to stay in character. She had forgotten that Little Wolf was supposed to be an only child. Captain Petrov appeared beside them, his face dark with anger. "What's going on here?" "The kid thinks he recognizes someone," Alexia explained. "Claims it's his brother." The captain studied Maria's face carefully. "Is that so? And why isn't this brother mentioned in your military records?" Maria's mind went blank. She couldn't think of a good lie, couldn't think of any explanation that would make sense. All she could do was stare down at the valley where the man who might be Dmitri was disappearing into another truck. I made a mistake," she finally said. "The distance, the poor light. I thought I saw someone I knew, but I was wrong." But the damage was already done. She could see the suspicion in Captain Petrov's eyes, the confusion in Alexei's face. Pavel was looking at her like she was a stranger. The prisoner exchange continued below them, but Maria could barely watch. The man she thought was Dmitri was loaded into a vehicle and driven away. She didn't even get a clear look at his face. The journey back to camp was the longest of her life. No one spoke to her. Captain Petrov rode ahead, clearly thinking hard about what had happened. Alexei kept glancing at her with worried eyes. When they finally reached the base, the captain called her into his office immediately. "Sit down," he said, closing the door behind them. "I want you to tell me the truth about what happened today." Maria sat in the hard wooden chair and tried to think of what to say. Her hands were shaking and she pressed them against her legs to make them stop. "I thought I recognized someone," she repeated. "But I was wrong. Were you?" Captain Petrov walked around his desk and sat down across from her. "Because your behavior today was not the behavior of a confused soldier. It was the behavior of someone desperate to reach a specific person." He pulled out her military file and spread it on the desk. "I've been looking at your records again. Everything seems to be in order, but something has been bothering me for weeks. You're different from other recruits. Too mature in some ways, too emotional in others." Maria's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Tomorrow morning, you will report to the medical officer for a complete physical examination," the captain continued. "It's routine for all soldiers who have been in the field for more than 6 months. I should have ordered it sooner." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. A complete medical examination. They would discover her secret immediately. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, would be over. That night, she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling while the other soldiers slept around her. She could hear Pavel snoring softly, Alexei muttering in his dreams. All these men who had become her brothers in arms without ever knowing who she really was. She thought about the man in the prison exchange. Had it really been Dmitri? Or had her desperate hope made her see what she wanted to see? Either way, she had thrown away 8 months of careful planning in a single moment of weakness. A message arrived just before midnight. One of the local women who sometimes brought supplies to the camp slipped Maria a folded piece of paper. It was written in a code she recognized from the underground network of families searching for missing relatives. "Your brother may be alive," the message said. "Detention facility 200 kilometers east. Transfer scheduled for next week. This is your only chance." Maria stared at the paper until the words blurred together. Dmitri was alive. He was real, not just a dream she had been chasing, and he was going to be moved again soon. But tomorrow morning her secret would be discovered. Captain Petrov would learn the truth, and she would be arrested, or worse. There would be no more chances to find her brother. She had one choice left, one last desperate option. She would have to run. Maria got up quietly and began gathering her few personal belongings. She left her military uniform folded neatly on the bed, but kept the civilian clothes she had hidden in her pack. She took some food, a water bottle, and the small photo of her and Dmitri that she always carried. As she prepared to leave, she looked one last time at the sleeping faces of the men who had accepted her as their brother. Alexei, who had taught her so much. Pavel, who had shared his food and his stories. Even Captain Petrov, who was only doing his job. She was sorry to leave them this way, sorry to break their trust. But finding Dmitri was more important than anything else, even her own safety. Maria slipped out of the camp just before dawn, leaving little Wolf behind forever. Now she was just a woman alone in a dangerous world, racing against time to save the only family she had left. Maria had been walking for 3 days straight, sleeping in abandoned buildings and drinking water from mountain streams. Her feet were covered in blisters, and her stomach ached from hunger. But she kept moving, driven by the message that had changed everything. Dmitri was alive, and she was running out of time to reach him. The detention facility sat like a grey stone fortress in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Maria crouched behind a cluster of pine trees, studying the building through a pair of binoculars she had taken from the military camp. She had been watching for 2 hours, learning the patterns of the guards, counting how many people went in and out. Getting inside seemed impossible, but Maria had learned many things during her months as a soldier. She knew how to move quietly, how to think like a fighter, and most importantly, how to act like she belonged somewhere even when she didn't. The key came when she saw a supply truck approaching the main gate. The driver was alone, and he looked tired and bored. Maria waited until he parked near the loading dock, then walked up to him with confidence she didn't feel. "Rough day?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. The driver looked up from his paperwork and shrugged. "Same as always. These people never know what they want delivered when." Maria nodded sympathetically. "I'm supposed to help with the evening transfer. New orders came down this morning. They want extra security for the prisoner transport." It was a complete lie, but she said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. She had learned that people rarely questioned someone who acted like They knew what they were doing. The driver barely looked at her fake papers. Fine with me. Less work for me to do alone. You know where the loading area is? Of course, Maria said, though she had no idea. 20 minutes later, she was inside the facility, wearing a borrowed uniform jacket and trying not to look as terrified as she felt. The building was full of long corridors that smelled like cleaning, chemicals and fear. Guards walked past her without giving her a second glance. Finding Dmitri was harder than getting inside. The facility was bigger than it looked from the outside, with multiple levels and dozens of rooms. Maria tried to look purposeful as she walked through the halls, checking doorways and listening for voices. She was starting to panic when she heard something that made her heart stop. Someone was humming a tune she recognized. It was an old song their mother used to sing when they were children, a lullaby about birds flying home at sunset. Only Dmitri hummed that song. The sound was coming from a room at the end of a narrow hallway. Maria approached carefully, her hands shaking. Through a small window in the door, she could see a man sitting on a narrow bed, his back turned to her. He looked thinner than she remembered, and his hair was longer, but she knew those shoulders. She knew the way he held his head when he was thinking that it was him. After 10 months of searching, she had found her brother. Maria tried the door handle, but it was locked. She looked around frantically until she found a guard's keyring hanging on a nearby wall. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the key, but finally the lock clicked open. Dmitri looked up as she entered the room. For a moment he didn't recognize her. She looked so different now, harder and thinner with short hair and military clothes. But then his eyes widened with shock and disbelief. "Maria," he whispered, "is it really you?" She wanted to run to him, to hug him and cry and tell him how sorry she was for taking so long to find him. But she could hear footsteps in the corridor. Outside, they didn't have much time. "We have to go," she said urgently. "Right now." But when Dmitri tried to stand up, she saw how weak he had become. His left leg was badly injured, and he could barely put weight on it. His face was pale, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "I can't run," he said quietly. "My leg was broken weeks ago, and it never healed right. I'll just slow you down." "I don't care," Maria said fiercely. "I'm not leaving without you." She helped him to his feet and they started moving toward the door, but they had only made it a few steps when alarms started blaring throughout the building. Someone had discovered that she didn't belong there. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridors. Shouts filled the air. They were trapped. Maria looked at her brother, seeing the defeat in his face. They both knew they weren't going to make it out together. Dmitri could barely walk, and she couldn't carry him far enough or fast enough to escape. "There's a service door at the end of this hall," Dmitri said, pointing with a shaking hand. "It leads to the outside. You can still make it if you go now." "No," Maria said firmly. "I came here to bring you home. I'm not leaving you again." But Dmitri grabbed her hands, his grip surprisingly strong. "Listen to me. Do you remember what I told you before I left for the military? I said that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is know when to retreat." The footsteps were getting closer. Maria could hear voices shouting orders, coordinating a search. "I need to tell you something," she said quickly. "The person who's been looking for you all this time, the soldier who saved 3 men from a frozen river, the one they called Little Wolf, that was me. I cut my hair and took your identity. I became a soldier to find you." Dmitri's eyes filled with tears. "You did what?" "I became you," she said simply. "For 10 months, I lived as your ghost. I learned to fight and march and be brave because I thought it would help me bring you home." For a moment, Dmitri couldn't speak. Then he pulled her into a quick, fierce hug. "I always knew you were the stronger one," he whispered. "Even when we were children, you were the one who protected me." The door at the end of the hall burst open. Guards poured into the corridor, their boots thundering on the concrete floor. "Go," Dmitri shouted, pushing Maria toward the service door. "Run." But instead of running with her, he did something that broke her heart. He deliberately stepped into the middle of the hallway, making himself a target. He shouted and waved his arms, drawing all the attention to himself. "Here, I'm here." She went the other way. Maria wanted to go back for him, but she knew it would make his sacrifice meaningless. With tears streaming down her face, she ran for the service door. The last thing she saw was Dmitri being surrounded by guards, but he was looking at her with pride and love. She made it outside just as more guards arrived. Hidden in the darkness, she watched through a fence as they took Dmitri back inside. He was alive, but he was captured again, and this time it was because of her. Maria stumbled away from the facility, her heart broken into pieces. She had found her brother only to lose him again. Worse, her rescue attempt had probably made his situation more dangerous, But as she walked through the cold night, she realized something important. Dmitri had seen her, had recognized her, had understood what she had done for him. For 10 months, she had wondered if she was chasing a ghost. Now she knew he was real, he was alive, and he knew she had never stopped looking for him. That knowledge gave her something she hadn't had in months. Hope. She didn't know how, but she was going to find another way to bring him home. Even if it took another 10 months, even if she had to become someone else entirely, she would not give up. Her brother was out there, and he was waiting for her to keep her promise. 4 months had passed since Maria's failed rescue attempt, and she had become someone new once again. Not a soldier this time, but a ghost moving through the shadows of the underground network that helped families find their missing loved ones. She worked with a group of women who called themselves the Silent Sisters, and they had taught her things the military never could. How to forge documents that could fool any official. How to gather information from people who didn't even know they were sharing secrets. How to disappear completely when the authorities came looking. Most importantly, how to wait for the right moment instead of rushing into danger. Maria lived in a small apartment above a bakery in a town 50 miles from where Dmitri was being held. Every morning she helped the baker's wife knead bread and serve customers. To everyone around her she was just Anna, a quiet young woman who had lost her family in the fighting and was trying to rebuild her life. But every evening, she became someone else entirely. She had contacts now, people who worked in government offices, who drove supply trucks, who cleaned the detention facilities. Slowly, carefully, she had built a network of information that told her everything about Dmitri's situation. He had been moved twice since her rescue attempt. The authorities were taking no chances with him after what happened. But Maria's sources told her that his health was improving. The injury to his leg was healing, and he was being treated better than before. More importantly, she had learned about something big that was coming. A major prisoner exchange, the largest one in over a year. Representatives from both sides had been negotiating for months, and finally they had reached an agreement. 300 prisoners would be released in exchange for 300 others. Dmitri's name was on the list. The exchange was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late autumn. Maria had been preparing for weeks, but not to interfere this time. She had learned her lesson about rushing in without a plan. Instead, she would wait and watch, and when her brother walked free, she would be there to meet him. The night before the exchange, Maria couldn't sleep. She stood by her window, looking out at the stars and thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. The frightened girl who had cut her hair 14 months ago felt like someone from another lifetime. The soldier called Little Wolf felt like a story she had heard about someone else. Now she was just Maria again, waiting for her brother to come home. The exchange site was a bridge that crossed a wide river between the two territories. Maria arrived before dawn and found a spot on a hillside where she could see everything clearly. Hundreds of other families were gathered there too, all of them waiting and hoping and praying that this would be the day their loved ones returned. Maria wore a simple blue scarf around her head, not to hide her identity this time, but because it had been their mother's. She thought Dmitri might recognize it from a distance. As the sun rose higher, vehicles began arriving at both ends of the bridge. Official cars, military trucks, ambulances, for those who might need medical attention. Maria's heart began beating faster when she saw the prison transport vehicles approaching. The exchange process was slow and careful. Names were called out one by one, documents were checked and double-checked, and then small groups of prisoners walked across the bridge toward freedom. Maria watched each group anxiously, scanning every face. 3 hours passed, then 4. Maria's back ached from standing so long, and her eyes were sore from straining to see clearly. Some families around her were celebrating as their loved ones appeared, while others were beginning to look worried as the day wore on without seeing the faces they were looking for. Then Maria heard a name that made her heart stop. Dmitri Volkov. She saw him before he saw her. He was walking slowly, still favoring his injured leg slightly, but he was walking on his own. His hair was longer than it used to be, and he looked older, but it was definitely him. Her brother was free. Dmitri stopped in the middle of the bridge and looked around at the crowd of people waiting on both sides. He was searching for something, or someone. His eyes moved across the hillside where Maria was standing. But there were so many people that he couldn't pick her out. Maria started walking down the hill toward him. As she got closer, she could see that he was thinner than before, and there were new lines around his eyes. But he was alive, and he was free, and that was all that mattered. When she was about 50 feet away, Maria stopped and slowly reached up to pull off her blue scarf. Her hair, which had grown back during the months of hiding, fell loose around her shoulders. It wasn't as long as it used to be, but it was unmistakably hers. Dimitri's eyes found her in the crowd. For a moment he just stared, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then his face broke into the biggest smile Maria had seen in over a year. He started walking toward her, then limping faster, then almost running despite his bad leg. Other people moved out of the way as they saw the reunion happening. When they were just a few steps apart, Maria felt tears filling her eyes. She had imagined this moment so many times, but the reality was more overwhelming than any dream. "I knew you would come," Dimitri said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Even when they moved me to different places, even when months passed, I knew you would be here when I got out." Maria nodded, not trusting herself to speak yet. She reached out and took his hands, and they felt real and warm and alive. "I kept your secret," he continued. "I never told them about the soldier who came to rescue me. They knew someone had tried to break me out, but they never learned it was my sister. You saved me that night," Maria finally managed to say. "You gave up your own chance to escape so I could get away." Dimitri shook his head. "You saved yourself. You became a soldier. You found me twice. You never gave up. I just bought you a little time to keep fighting." They stood there in the middle of the chaotic celebration, holding hands and looking at each other like they were trying to memorize every detail. Around them, other families were having their own reunions, but Maria felt like she and Dimitri were the only two people in the world. "What happens now?" Dimitri asked. Maria smiled through her tears. "Now we go home. We try to remember who we used to be before all this started, and we help each other heal. Do you think we can do that? Go back to being the people we were before?" Maria considered the question seriously. She thought about the frightened girl who had cut her hair, the soldier called Little Wolf, the underground worker who had learned to forge documents and gather secrets. All of those people were part of her now. "I don't think we can go back," she said honestly, "but maybe we can go forward. Maybe we can become new people together." Dimitri nodded and pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home after the longest journey imaginable. As they held each other, Maria realized something important. The mask she had worn for so long wasn't just the cloth that had covered her face, or the identity she had borrowed, or the roles she had played. The real mask had been her fear that she wasn't strong enough to save the person she loved most. But she had taken off that mask months ago, the moment she decided to cut her hair and become someone brave. Now, standing in the sunshine with her brother's arms around her, Maria knew that the bravest thing she had ever done wasn't becoming a soldier or infiltrating a prison or forging documents. The bravest thing was never giving up hope that love could bring them back together, and it had.